Picture this. It's a cold March evening in 1922, deep in the Bavarian countryside. Snow blankets the rolling hills, and a small farmstead sits isolated, surrounded by forests. Inside that farm, 6 people are going about their evening. A grandmother preparing dinner, children doing their homework, a farmer finishing his chores. Within hours, all of them would be dead, brutally murdered with a farm tool in one of the most disturbing crime scenes investigators had ever witnessed. But here's what makes this case truly terrifying. Days before the murders, the family had noticed strange things. Footprints in the snow leading from the forest to their farm, but none leading back out. Newspapers going missing, unfamiliar footsteps in the attic at night. Someone had been watching them. Someone had been living in their home, and after the murders, that same someone stayed on the property for days, feeding the animals, eating the family's food, living among the corpses. This is the story of the Hinterkaifeck murders, a century-old mystery that still haunts Germany today. A case so bizarre, so methodically brutal, that even modern forensic experts remain baffled. To understand this case, we need to go back to Bavaria in 1922. Germany was reeling from World War I. The economy was in ruins. Inflation was spiraling out of control, and rural communities were isolated in ways we can barely imagine today. The Hinterkaifeck farm sat about 70 kilometers north of Munich, between the small towns of Ingolstadt and Schrobenhausen. The name Hinterkaifeck literally means behind Kaifeck, referring to its location behind the nearby hamlet of Kaifeck. This wasn't just remote, this was profoundly isolated. The nearest neighbors were far enough away that screams wouldn't be heard. The forest pressed in close on all sides. In winter, with snow covering the ground, the farm could be cut off from the world for days. 6 people lived on this property. Andreas Gruber, age 63, the patriarch of the family and owner of the farm. His wife Cecilia, age 72. Their widowed daughter, Victoria Gabriel, age 35. Victoria's 2 children, 7-year-old Cecilia, named after her grandmother, and 2-year-old Joseph. And finally, the maid, Maria Baumgartner, age 44, who had only started working there that very day, March 31st, 1922. The previous maid had quit 6 months earlier, claiming the farm was haunted. In the days leading up to the murders, Andreas Gruber noticed things that unsettled him deeply. About a week before, he discovered a strange set of footprints in the snow. They led from the edge of the forest, across the fields, directly to the farmhouse. Andreas followed them, his unease growing with each step. The footprints stopped at the farm. But there were no footprints leading away. Whoever made those tracks had entered his property and never left. Or at least, they hadn't left by the same route they'd come. Then there were the newspapers. The family subscribed to a newspaper that was delivered regularly. Several issues went missing, vanished from where they should have been. Andreas heard sounds, too. Footsteps in the attic at night, creaking floorboards above the bedrooms when everyone should have been asleep. He investigated but found nothing. No signs of forced entry, no evidence of an intruder. But the most chilling detail? Andreas found a set of house keys that didn't belong to anyone in the family. Strange keys on his property, and no explanation for how they got there. He mentioned these occurrences to neighbors. He was clearly disturbed by them. But this was rural Bavaria in 1922. What could he do? Call the police because of footprints and missing newspapers? In that time and place, you dealt with your own problems. The previous maid's warnings about the place being haunted probably came back to him during those long nights, hearing those footsteps above. On March 31st, 1922, a new maid arrived. Maria Baumgartner was a 44-year-old woman who desperately needed the work. Despite the previous maid's stories, despite the farm's reputation, she took the job. It would be the last decision she ever made. The murders. The exact timeline is difficult to establish, but investigators believe the killings began on the evening of March 31st, sometime after dark. The method was brutal and methodical. The killer used a mattock, a farming tool similar to a pickaxe, with a blade on one side and a pick on the other. It's a heavy, vicious weapon, designed for breaking hard ground. 4 of the victims, Andreas, Cecilia, Victoria, and young Cecilia, were lured to the barn one by one. This wasn't a frenzied attack. This was calculated. The killer apparently called them out individually, and as each one entered the barn, they were struck down from behind. The scene in the barn was nightmarish. The victims had been struck multiple times, their skulls shattered. Young Cecilia had been alive for hours after the attack, having torn out clumps of her own hair in pain and terror before she finally died. Inside the house, Maria Baumgartner, who had been there for less than a day, was killed in her bedroom. 2-year-old Joseph was murdered in his crib in his mother's bedroom, strangled or suffocated after the mattock attack. 6 people, an entire household, wiped out in one night. But then something even more disturbing happened. The killer didn't leave. For days after the murders, neighbors noticed smoke rising from the chimney at Hinterkaifeck. The livestock were being fed and cared for. Everything seemed normal from a distance, but the family didn't come to town. They didn't go to church on Sunday, April 2nd, which was unusual for them. Little Kazelia didn't show up for school. Still, in a rural community where people valued their privacy and independence, it took time for anyone to check on them. It wasn't until April 4th, 4 days after the murders, that neighbors finally went to investigate. What they found was a scene beyond comprehension. The bodies in the barn had been partially covered with hay and straw, a cursory attempt to conceal them. Inside the house, everything was eerily normal. The kitchen had been used, food had been prepared and eaten. The animals had been fed and watered. Someone had been living there, among the corpses, for days. The killer had apparently slept in the house, cooked meals in the kitchen, and maintained the farm's daily routines. Neighbors later recalled seeing smoke from the chimney and lights in the windows during those 4 days, never imagining the horror that lay within. What kind of person could do this? Not just commit 6 brutal murders, but then calmly go about daily life, sleeping under the same roof as their victims? This detail, more than anything else, transforms Hinterkaifeck from a tragic murder case into something that feels almost supernatural in its strangeness. The investigation. The Munich Police Department sent investigators immediately. What they found baffled them then, and it continues to baffle experts today. Over 100 people were interviewed. Suspects ranged from traveling merchants to jealous rivals to possible family members. The leading theory involved Victoria's husband, Karl Gabriel, who had been reported killed in World War I. His body had never been identified, and some believed he had survived and returned home, possibly fathering young Joseph, and then murdering the family in some sort of domestic rage. But this theory had problems. Why kill the maid who just arrived? Why the methodical nature of the killings? Why stay afterward? Another theory focused on possible treasure. There were rumors that Andreas Gruber had money hidden on the property, savings that he kept secret from authorities. Perhaps someone had heard these rumors and come to rob him. But again, why stay for days? If it was robbery, why not take what you came for and leave immediately? The investigation was hampered by the limitations of 1920s forensic science. There were no fingerprint databases, no DNA analysis, no modern crime scene investigation techniques. The bodies were so badly decomposed after 4 days that determining exact time of death was impossible. In a particularly macabre twist, the victims' heads were removed and sent to Munich for examination by clairvoyants and psychics, as this was considered a legitimate investigative technique at the time. The heads were never returned to the families for burial and were lost, possibly destroyed during World War II bombing raids on Munich. Despite all the effort, despite over 100 suspects being questioned, no one was ever charged. The case went cold. Theories and suspects. Over the decades, numerous theories have emerged about who killed the Gruber family and why. The returning soldier. Theory: Karl Gabriel, Victoria's husband, was declared dead in the war, but his body was never positively identified. Some believe he survived, returned home, and found his wife with a 2-year-old child he suspected wasn't his. In a rage, he killed everyone. But this doesn't explain the stranger's presence in the attic before the murders, or why he would kill a maid he'd never met. The incest theory. Disturbing rumors circulated that Andreas Gruber had an inappropriate relationship with his daughter Victoria, and that young Joseph might have been his child, not Karl Gabriel's. According to this theory, someone close to the family discovered this secret and took revenge. But again, this seems too elaborate for a revenge killing, and doesn't explain the bizarre behavior afterward. The robbery gone wrong. Perhaps thieves came for the rumored hidden money. When discovered, they panicked and killed everyone, then searched the property for days looking for the cash. This explains staying on the property but not the methodical nature of the killings or luring victims one by one to the barn. The stranger in the attic. This is perhaps the most terrifying theory. Someone had been living in or frequently entering the property for weeks, as evidenced by the footprints, missing newspapers, and sounds in the attic. This person knew the family's routines, knew the layout of the farm, and finally decided to act. But who and why? In 2007, students and faculty from the Fürstenfeldbruck Police Academy reopened the case using modern investigative techniques. They examined OL. Over the past century, a handful of theories have emerged about who killed the Gruber family and why, but none have ever been proven. One popular theory centers on Victoria's husband, Karl Gabriel, who was declared killed in action during World War I. However, his body was never recovered. Some speculate that he survived the war, returned to Hinterkaifeck, and discovered that his wife had a 2-year-old child, Joseph, whom he suspected was not his. In a fit of rage, he could have murdered the entire family. Yet, this theory fails to explain the stranger's presence in the attic before the killings, or why he would murder the new maid, a woman he had never met. Another theory points to the disturbing rumors of an incestuous relationship between Andreas Gruber and his daughter Victoria, with some believing young Josef was Andreas's child. If this dark secret were discovered by someone close to the family, they might have sought revenge. But this motive seems overly elaborate for such a methodical slaughter, and doesn't account for the bizarre behavior of the killer after the crime. A simpler explanation might be a robbery gone wrong. Thieves, believing the family had hidden money, could have been discovered and panicked, killing everyone before spending days searching the property. This accounts for the killer remaining on the farm, but not the calculated way the victims were lured one by one to their deaths. Perhaps the most chilling theory is that a complete stranger had been living on the farm for weeks. The footprints in the snow, the missing keys, and the strange noises from the attic all point to an intruder who knew the family's daily routines and the layout of the property. But who was this person, and what drove them to commit such a heinous act? In 2007, students from the Furstenfeldbruck Police Academy re-examined the case using modern criminal profiling techniques. Their investigation concluded that the killer was likely familiar with the farm and had planned the murders with cold premeditation. The fact that the perpetrator stayed afterward suggested a chilling combination of extreme confidence and severe mental disturbance. Despite their efforts, too much time had passed, and crucial evidence was lost. The Hinterkaifeck farm itself was demolished in 1923. Today, only a small memorial marks the spot where the house once stood, a clearing slowly being reclaimed by the forest. Yet the story endures, a staple of true crime lore. Perhaps it's the isolated setting, the footprints leading to the house but not away, or the thought of someone living undetected among a family, waiting for the right moment to strike. It reminds us that some mysteries are destined to remain unsolved. A century later, the questions still linger, and justice for the Gruber family remains elusive, buried forever with the secrets of that cold March night. The Hinterkaifeck murders stand as a chilling reminder that some mysteries may never be solved, their truths lost to the passage of time. Despite over a century of investigation, despite the application of modern forensic techniques to the long cold case, and despite countless hours of painstaking analysis, the identity of the perpetrator remains shrouded in shadow. Somewhere, buried deep in the dusty records of 1920s Bavaria, within the fragmented statements of over 100 witnesses, or perhaps hidden in the very evidence that was examined and then subsequently lost to history, the answer might still exist. It is a tantalizing possibility, a faint glimmer of hope in a century-old darkness. Or, perhaps more likely, the killer took their secrets to the grave decades ago, and the complete truth of that horrifying night is simply gone forever, scattered like ashes on the wind. What we are left with is a story that refuses to fade, a narrative that continues to haunt us with its brutal and unanswered questions. It is the story of a family systematically destroyed in their own home, a baffling mystery that has confounded generations of investigators, and the profoundly disturbing knowledge that for days, someone once walked among those bodies, lived in that house, and then vanished back into the fabric of history, leaving only ghosts behind. The forest has reclaimed the land where Hinterkaifeck once stood. The farm buildings are gone. The family is gone. And only the unnerving story remains, whispered in the rustling leaves of the Bavarian woods. Thank you for watching. If you found this video informative and thought-provoking, please show your support by liking and subscribing. Let me know in the comments what unsolved mystery you would like me to cover next. And maybe, just maybe, be sure to lock your doors tonight.